Such a tennis match.
You guys, again, everybody is welcome to come up here. Can you sit? Do you want
You want
to
to sit
sit
on
up
that
here?
side? Yeah.
Just so that we can all form a circle. Smell.
Like I'm jumping in.
So again, this is our second roundtable. We had one on Saturday. The purpose of these is for the town council and the school board to gather questions or thoughts you guys might have as we work through budget deliberations. And again, essentially where we are in the process is the town manager and the superintendent kicked off their proposals at the end of March. Since then, both the town finance committee and the school finance committee have been working to try and figure out ways to get to our stated goal of a 5% net budget. That particular goal equates to what would be a 2.25% increase in tax bills. Again, that's neutral of the reval impact that was recently shared last week. That helps us better understand how that's going to factor into tax bills as well. So again, this isn't very formal. There's nothing to present. We're really just here to listen and answer the questions that we can, gather feedback, and make sure that the finance committees can take that feedback as we continue to work through the budget process. So with that, maybe we can do quick introductions.
Hi, I'm John Christian.
I'm John Anderson, Finance Committee Chair.
I'm Shannon Lynch, I'm the school board chair.
Carolyn Gammon, Finance Committee Chair for the school board.
And Tom Hall, Town Manager.
If we want to do introductions in the room, starting in the back. Rita, that would be you. I'm sorry. Rita?
Carrie Peabody.
Carrie Peabody. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. So again, if anybody wants to kick us off with questions, or if anybody has anything burning that they would like to discuss, Rita and I were having a bit of a conversation before we started, so just open it up for any general questions or comments.
I'll start. I'm not bashful. I'm a 27, almost 27-year Scarborough resident. We're in the Pleasant Hill neighborhood. I guess I would just like to say that, first of all, I love Scarborough. It's a great town, okay? But the town as a whole just seems hell-bent on spending money, and they can't do anything in a reasonable manner. You have to, this building, for instance, the town did not want this building. The residents of the town fought against this building, and it got built anyway. You can't do it. The library, we can't have a $3 million library expansion. We have to have a $7 or $12 million library expansion. I just don't understand why the town is so hell-bent on doing everything on such a grand scale. If you brought some reason into the process, you might make more headway with the citizens.
Is it mostly as it relates to, because Rita was talking about this earlier about buildings and
Schools, buildings, expansion. I work with a volunteer program, and I meet with an elderly gentleman every couple of weeks and sit and talk to him for a couple of hours. And he says the rate it's going, there's not going to be a tree left in Scarborough.
Mm-hmm.
And there isn't.
Have you participated at all in any of the school building advisory committee meetings, or
My wife is involved in the building.
Okay.
Yes.
How's that going for her? Does she feel like the process is?
I really don't feel comfortable.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. There's also, for the community center, just as a FYI for everybody here, there's an open house that is being hosted by the ad hoc advisory committee that's on the 24th.
Yes, Wednesday, 3 to 7 at Wentworth.
Yeah, so that's an opportunity, Carrie, if you know, for you to go see what they're coming up with and offer that specific input on the building. We at the council level haven't seen anything except for the counselors that are the liaison. So, you know, if you feel like excess is a issue for you, I would encourage you to go to that and check it out and see what feedback you can provide that committee, which is mostly led by citizens too.
Yep.
Like, this is the thing, a lot of these building committees typically are citizen led. So, you know, I think hearing from other residents is important, especially those that aren't directly participating. Richard had his hand up, and then Steve.
John, just following up on what this gentleman said. The community center, I think, is a prime example.
Mhm.
You know, this last fall, a very needed project got defeated. And that supposedly was going to be the town focus to figure out a way to fill the need of the young children in the town of Scarborough.
Mhm.
And we are, pardon my French, hell bent on jamming this community center through. I've been told by someone in authority in this town, I've given up using names because I found that gets offensive. But somebody told me that they were gonna they were gonna get the community center committee to a point and then kind of put it on the shelf until perhaps a year or two from now. Early on, I've attended several of the community center meetings. Early on, they talked about a library component to it. And as this gentleman alluded to, we've defeated a library expansion twice. And now all of a sudden, I guess it's somewhere buried within the community center. Sometime back after the fall election where the school was defeated, there was some conversations about trust. When you folks don't listen, that creates a trust issue. And I don't think you may be listening when you aren't hearing. We can't afford, and at this point I say, go ahead, put the community center, the school and everything else you want on the ballot and watch, they'll all go down in flames. And then you'll sit there and say, why? Stop and think, how much burden, tax burden, do you folks want to put on the residents? I'm a retired person. In next month, I will have been a Scarborough resident in the same household 50 years.
Mhm.
When I moved here, my taxes were just about $600. They're now substantially more than that, and soon to go up.
Mhm.
I can afford to pay my current tax bill. Why? Because we led a very conservative life.
Mhm.
We couldn't afford something we didn't have. If there were 2 or 3 things that we wanted, we could only afford one, we bought only one. As this gentleman says, this town doesn't seem to operate that way.
Mhm.
We voted for, I believe, if I'm correct, it was $19 million to build a public safety building next door. I've heard, never officially, but I've heard that we ended up spending $2 or $3 million in excess of what was approved by the bond. And I distinctly remember, because I went to one of the meetings early on when the bond was discussed at the Dunstan Fire House. And we were assured that $19 million would cover it, and there would be no more ads. So
Mhm.
I believe that turned out to not be fact.
Mhm.
We need
So,
to slow down, and you folks not only need to have these listening sessions, learning sessions, but listen and to what people are truly saying.
so what, if you were up here and you were making decisions about the community center, the school, like what would you do? I'm just curious, like what would you recommend if you were?
Immediately stop all forward motion of the community stuff.
Mhm. Is that kind of the biggest concern for you right now? Is that particular one?
It's all a concern, John. I just, there's, and I know there are people I've heard several people in town say they want a pool. Well, this building that's being proposed is a lot more than a pool. I have to say, I've attended several of the meetings. It is my guess. minimum, I believe the square footage is just under $85,000, which probably translates to somewhere in excess of $50 million project.
Mm-hmm.
The first project was shelved because it came in at a ridiculous price. I attended several of those meetings. And that was a lease, 30-year lease agreement that was gonna cost the taxpayers something in the amount of $3 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I do not believe that it is a smart move for the town to go ahead with a project that contains library element that the town has said no to twice.
Mm-hmm.
And as this gentleman said, and I heard it pointed out, this building was voted down 2 or 3 times, and as he said, it still got built. So the leadership in this town does not like the word no and doesn't accept it. You know,
Mhm.
if a no appears to create a challenge of, well, we'll show them. There's 2 ways to skin a cat, so
Mhm.
we'll do it without their vote somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know the inner workings, but
Mhm.
my personal feeling is that I would like not to be faced with the cost of either project, but I fully understand that we need schools and we need to take care of children. And for you folks to be working on a parallel path, apparently, in support of 2 major projects,
Mm-hmm.
I think is dead wrong. And if you pursue it, I'll go on public record now saying you'll be sorry because you'll see both projects defeated.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm only 1 vote. But if they both come forward, I will work diligently to see that neither is passed.
Mm-hmm. But you said yourself, you see the value in the school. So for those in the room, do you guys generally feel like the school relative to the community center is the bigger priority that you would like to see? Like if one has to advance, clearly there's a prioritization.
I would say the school's the bigger priority. Here, I'll expound a little bit on that. The school didn't get nudged out, it got slaughtered. You guys lost 2 to 1 on the school. The people don't want to pay that much for a consolidated school. They like the neighborhood schools, okay? They feel that there's a better solution, whether it's a 4th school and some modular buildings or whatever that is, doesn't matter. But what you guys are doing right now with the community center, it's like, okay, I need major remodeling on my house that I can't afford, so let's buy a camp. That's what you guys are doing. It makes no sense to the taxpayers because we're the ones paying for all this stuff. If you can't afford this project, why are you adding more projects that would be nice? They're nice haves, but they're not necessaries.
Any other? Yeah. You agree? Good. It's good to hear.
That's the one.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, I definitely share the opinion that the schools are the top priority and, you know, we need to prioritize that first and make sure that that gets on a better footing. I shared in our review with the budget that I felt like putting the community center in the CIP in FY26 wasn't practical in my opinion. But again, that's up to the entire council to determine like relative timing for all of these different projects. The one piece that was shared specific to the community center that, you know, again, was interesting to hear, but still more details need to get fleshed out is that the operating costs for that, apparently based on the modeling that they're doing right now. And Richard, you probably know more than I do because I haven't gone to any of the meetings. 90% of the operating costs should be covered by incoming revenues.
Can I tell you something about that, John?
Mm-hmm.
The outfit that they were paying, I believe, $100,000 to work with the community development. Their proposal, their estimates were, I believe, 75% to 80% of the cost to operate it would be covered. They also, in their analysis, they have all of the jobs listed. And they're talking, and they had estimated salaries
Mhm.
for these jobs. And I'm sure, Mr. Hall can attest to that hiring people today at $16 an hour is probably not realistic.
Mm.
They're talking 3 years from now, and I believe there were 5 or 6 positions that they had salary estimates of $16 an hour.
Mhm.
But Todd, immediately when this 75, I think it was 75% of the cost recoup, didn't like that number, so he reworked the numbers to come up with the 90%. So the experts that we're hiring came up with a little lower number, which wasn't liked, so Todd took it upon himself. And maybe he's realistic, I don't know, but it just was kind of comical that the people who are being paid to analyze and to give us information, when they said something that wasn't liked, they got overridden and changed very quickly, so.
Yeah. I think the point I'm trying to make though is that whether it's 75 or 90, there's a difference between like the school project and this project, in that the school project is gonna have to be fully bonded and paid for by taxpayers, where there will be some offset, because what we would do with this project when it goes to ballot, and again, no decision has been made by council yet when or even if it goes to ballot. That's a later decision that isn't going to be decided through the budget process. That's going to be decided later. There's also the hub that would retire, which has an operating cost that it carries as well, that would be absorbed in the bond, but you would still have to have the capital outlay for the debt for the initial building. But again, that was just news to me, that I was like, oh, that's a good point. Not saying that means it needs to get prioritized and come sooner. It just, each capital project is slightly different, where the school is going to be whatever it is. Like, we don't even know yet what the solution is based on the committee. But that cost will have to be fully a new cost, I guess, that would be 100% borne by taxpayers as part of debt. Let's see, Steve, before you ask your question, and then we'll go to Steve.
Since it was on the community center, I just wanted to ask, my understanding is this planning for this community center preceded the school bond. It was sort of going along parallel.
Mhm.
And so they're continuing a process that had been started before. No, this
Yeah.
is this is since the school bond failed, this committee?
So there was an original committee pre-COVID that looked into, and that was a facility to be built in the Downs in conjunction with the Downs. And that's where the lease came in. The Downs developers would own the building and the town would lease it to the extent of, I believe it was $3 million are awful handy to that over a 30-year period. So
But let me cut right to my question. Why wouldn't we just put it on the ballot, let the voters vote it down, and be done with it?
Because we don't, I just said, this town doesn't accept no. If we,
Let me stop you there. When you say this town doesn't, if this is going to the voters, like the school went to the voters, it's a bond. If the voters say no, we don't want to pay this money, right? It's too much, this, that, and the other thing. Then project's over with, goal achieved.
no, it is not. It's not a.
Why put us through that? I mean, isn't it the
Well-
leadership's role to make some reasonable assessments of?
Steve, there'd be as many people who would argue, why are you depriving us the opportunity to speak our minds? It's our money.
In that case, why go through this process? Why not just put them up on the ballot?
The library was voted down twice and it's
Yeah.
back in the community zone, so.
Well, what started it back up was when we did the 2022 community survey, and we asked people what their priorities were for capital projects. The community center was number one. and the school was number 2. And so when we did that survey, at least that's what those who took the survey said they wanted. Yeah, well, and that was where, again, we could have at that time, in theory, said, well, voters want this, we're gonna push it forward. But again, we said we can't do it right now, we need to prioritize the school.
Mhm.
So that became the priority. I think it's a good call out that there was that committee that was formed pre-COVID. And then when COVID happened, I don't even think they got the chance to present their final report
They
to the
did.
council, or they
Final
did.
report, yep.
And then that paused, and then again, because of those survey results, the council elected to at least restart the committee to re-explore, which started before the school bond failed. It did happen last year. It was a council goal last year to, based on those survey results, to continue to pursue that. But again, that doesn't mean that the decision is made today that it's gonna go to ballot at any specific point in time. Like, that's an action that the council, not this council probably, but the next council will have to determine if they're gonna put it on the ballot or not.
Yeah, if I could just add a little bit of context, in my mind, what makes the community center conversation different? There's been at least 3 formal occasions over the last 2 decades where the community has expressed a strong desire conceptually for a community center. It has not been defined, but in that, there's a lot to be said for that. We need to say what it is. And the effort that's underway now is actually defining for ourselves, as opposed to in partnership with the Downs and a for-profit recreational outfit. I think they were called The Edge. That was a totally different model.
Mhm.
And so I think the council and why we're making this investment is to better understand for ourselves, what does a community center look like?
Mhm.
What are its amenities? What's its likely cost? What are its revenue potential to offset costs? So I think that's the distinct difference in my mind, is that the voters have told us over,
Mhm.
you know, at least 3 times I can document very clearly that conceptually they're interested in exploring this. So I think
Yeah.
it behooves leadership to understand what that is, and when the time is right, to put that question to the voters.
Yeah. But to your point, Richard, when we did the Parks and Facilities Master Plan, which also was a rigorous survey where we reached out to residents to get their input, which happened after the survey, and I think it's probably been a year since that was done. The feedback was they want an aquatics facility, or they definitely want some sort of place where they can have a pool and go swimming. So the notion of like feedback from the community, at least through these surveys, continues to say they want a pool at least. If we're gonna build a pool, we have the hub right now that's providing programming space. Does it make sense to keep the hub or put that programming in with the pool?
John,
Yeah.
that pool though, is always presented in terms of pool. It's a pool.
Mhm.
It's- The cost of it is never put in context. The open house they're having Wednesday, whatever it is. I mean, okay, here, nice pictures, drawings, renderings of what the pool / community center is going to look like, which, is almost identical to the one they designed 2 years ago. We basically spent $100,000 to have the plans redone. If you look at them, it's the same square footages, the same components. And so that's gonna be presented, all the nice pictures, and folks who want a pool are gonna come up and say, yeah. There's no pricing has been discussed, none. They refuse to discuss the pricing. I mean, the first, look at the pricing is in this year's budget, where a nice round number of 50 million is there. I mean, which is a good thing. That's where it belongs. It belongs in a 5-year capital projection. But you can't ask people, gee, would you like this, without putting it in the financial context. And it has to be a longer term financial context. So you can say, oh, here's a pool at 50 million. Here's a school at 100, 150. I don't know what the number is, obviously. And here's a library at 15 or 20 million. And here's our commitment to 30 by 30 for another, 30, 40, 50 million. Who knows? But to not have those all, together, and the priority of them and the tax impact, I don't, how can you make reasonable decisions?
Mhm.
John, if I asked, would you agree with me that if I asked every individual in town if they'd like a brand new BMW? The 99.9% would say yes. If that's the only question I asked. If I then said, it's gonna cost you $1,000 a month. Oh, I can't afford that. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, and I don't think what you guys are saying is unreasonable, and I don't know if at the open house, like I'm not on that committee, so I'm not sure exactly what the plan is, but I'm assuming they're prepared to, if somebody has a question about how much it costs, that's a question that they're prepared to answer, or at least.
I would expect so. I mean,
Yeah.
if they're gonna be talking about operational expenses and fees, that means they've done some fairly detailed analysis, what it's gonna cost to run it. They certainly, I would expect, have a very good sense of what it costs to build it too.
Yeah, so why don't you go and ask those questions, and if you don't get those answers,
Well,
let us know.
That wasn't the case, Tom, as of the last meeting.
Hmm.
I know, I was there.
Mhm.
I think I made an inquiry at one point saying, when are we gonna have the cost numbers?
Yep.
They haven't not been presented. And going along with that, if you didn't have the cost numbers, you don't have the debt service numbers. And I'll almost guarantee you that 90% coverage didn't include debt service.
Mhm.
No, it certainly didn't. It was never expected to.
Well, and I will add though to the conversation about prioritization, like we did make it a council goal this year to do multi-year capital planning, at least have a list, prioritize it and relook at it. And so we are gonna do that this year. It's gonna be post-budget. That's just where the timing landed in terms of getting it done. But that is something that the finance committee after budget has slated to take on and work with the schools to do it jointly to make sure we're looking at all major capital projects that are needed. And try and make sure that we're having that conversation around priorities, timing and things like that. But to your point, like there's some things that we just won't know the details to, and we're gonna have to just, again, make our best educated guesses from staff and stuff in terms of what we're gonna put in there so that we can do modeling and figure out what makes sense.
Right, I mean, just like this year's 5-year capital budget in the budget package, that doesn't include the school. I mean, how, we don't know what the number is, but we know it's a big number, so
Mhm.
pick a number and stick it in there for planning purposes, so people have some, at least context.
Mhm. Have you guys talked about that further of how you? Okay, do you wanna turn on your mic?
Sorry. We've added a line for the school and, but we have not come up with a dollar amount. So right now it's,
But there is a plan to
TBD.
put something or do something.
we certainly can.
Yes. So again, these are things that we've talked about with the school.
Yeah.
When we had our initial kickoff. And so there are some items in motion that just aren't complete yet, that's part of where we're at in the process is. They presented their budgets, we've had discussions, staff is going back, looking at things. Tomorrow, we have our next finance committee meeting, where we'll get the latest list of
Wednesday.
changes. Wednesday, sorry. And I know last week, Wednesday, the 24th at 6 o'clock, preceded by another roundtable. At our last meeting, essentially to get to goal, we need to find $2.2 million. As of the last meeting, we're down about $1 million. And you request the school to go back and find $1 million and for the town to find another 200,000. So that was essentially what the finance committee voted on at the last meeting. And they were all on vacation and just got back today and had a finance committee meeting. So I don't know if you guys have an update.
Yeah, we got in some new estimates. And so we had a favorable estimate with the family medical leave that was being, new law going into effect that will hit in January. And we've been able to bring down costs by $165,000 for that. In addition to the anthem coming down, which was the 1.3 million you're looking for from us. So we've got about $200,000 between the family medical leave and school nutrition that is coming down. We talked today about CIP.
Mhm.
A lot of the things in CIP that we were looking at, they're on the list for this year, and it's basically to say we can go, like the roof repair at the high school. It's won't, it won't be spent until FY 26. But we need to be able to tell the contractor and whoever's supplying the roofing materials that we do have this money set aside. So it's gonna be bonded as well. So it really won't, it's in this year's budget, but it really will impact FY 26 and FY 20, more than likely 26 and maybe into 27. So we went through the CIP, and there was a few little things that we were able to take out, but we go over our operating expenses on Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah. and also
Anything to
the-
add?
There was an additional workers' comp adjustment, that was another 43,000 that is found.
Yeah.
Like a pleasant surprise, so that came in as well. And I think that, just piggybacking on what Carolyn's saying, the way I heard Kate explain it, the capital improvement projects, the reason, the goal is to try to bring down, the goal as we understand it is to bring down the ask this year to reduce the impact to the taxpayers right now. So capital improvement projects, because they're bonded and because of the timeline that Todd needs to secure vendors, to buy materials, to do all the things involved in the project. These things, they're not bonded until it's spent. So taking away capital improvement projects is not going to in fact bring down the dollar ask for the taxpayers for this year.
Yep.
So that's where the problem really lies, right? Trying to get to the goal meaningfully without also, deferring projects that could potentially harm the buildings. For example, the roof at the high school. That's a pretty large project, but it's one, if that's not done, what is the potential impact to the building that we're trying to preserve and maintain?
Yep. We have some other people who just joined us. We're just talking, answering questions, so.
Well, I still have my question about
Yep.
the class size at high school.
But now we have some board members who can hopefully answer it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I completely understand that there are higher level, there are specialized classes that have small class size. But that's all accounted for when you actually calculate the average. If the average is 14.6 and the goal is 20 to 24, then you have, we're well below our goal. And year after year, I mean, we have not cut out any positions. And yet we bring on ed techs, 11 new positions in lower grades. And we're well below, the class size that is our target.
You want me to take it or do you want this one? Go ahead. So first off, we did discuss this at length in the budget workshops, and I think what we're going to ultimately try to do is look at another way of calculating that number. Because what happens is your core classes, in a way that makes sense, with K through 5, not in a way to, I see you're like, what are you talking about? The K through 5, it's a little bit easier, right? Because you have X number of students and X number of classrooms, that translates to X number of kids per class. It's very easy because they're not moving around, they're not switching between various classrooms. It's a fairly cut and dry process. The middle school, when they start transitioning to changing classrooms, this is when you start to see that difference, and it's more so pronounced at the high school level. So you're right, the 11 ed techs are an ask for the incoming K class. There's no new ask at the high school. So what we're trying to drive at is the core classes. So your math, your history, your science, your English, those core subjects, those classes are large in size. So they are at the average that you mentioned, the 20 kids. Where it becomes difficult is this average, the way it's calculated at the high school, it includes special education classes. It includes specialized classes that might have perhaps a little bit less than 20 students, but not less meaningful or important to the kids, right? So those are included in the VOTEC classes are included in there. So once you put all of that in, that average ends up coming down. So we had talked about it a little bit. We haven't fully gotten into what that looks like, but at the middle school, if you notice, their class sizes hover right around where they should be, and they're switching classrooms, right? So they're doing what I'm saying, they're switching around and going to different classrooms, but their averages are where they should be. So, the high school class is something we have to look at for next year for sure. But, the process at the high school too with selecting classes is it's a bottom up approach. So the kids select their schedules, they select the classes that they're looking at the same, that they want to take, that are meaningful to them when they leave high school and they're developing a career path. So that's the other side of this. And then the last thing is that every year the principal does a review with his staff, and looks at the class sizes. Are there some that just are not being taken, or there's not enough kids that are enrolled in it that makes this class something that we should maintain? And so they go through that program of studies every year and cut classes. But what that means is teachers might be reallocated somewhere else where they're needed. So which is why for 2 years now that high school has not asked for any new staff because they haven't needed it.
And the school population at the high school has not really increased, and
For
if
now, yeah.
anything, it's down. So, if you're looking to trim, let's face the reality of what is gonna happen this year in June. Is this budget is gonna cause a tax increase already of 4.75% with no increase whatsoever. And just the shift from commercial to residential. And it's gonna, anything on top of that, you're looking at some pretty hefty increases for a lot of people. And they're gonna take it out the only way they can take it out, and that's on the school budget.
Mhm.
And we need to do what we can do to make sure that doesn't happen.
Mhm.
And so
So what would you,
I'm taxpayer. I'm not on town staff. I do what I look at the budget. I spend way more time on it than probably, 90% of the town. And I'm,
99%.
I'm
Sorry.
looking at 6% salary increases this year. I think that's too much. I really do. So, I can make suggestions, but that's really, I see that as, Tom and Jeff Bruno. That's their job.
Yep, and that's essentially what we've kind of directed at this point, is for Jeff to find $1 million and Tom to find another 200,000. And that's just at least to get to our net budget goal. What happens after that, I think, will be up to council to figure out if they want to go beyond that. But again, I'm curious, like, it is important to hear exactly what residents want, because like when you start to go below that, you really are getting into programming. So it's really gets to the question of what is the programming that residents are willing to do without, so that we can find ways to make reductions.
And I can look at, well, we're gonna sell Alger Hall. I don't see the revenue from that. I see this year, the Family Leave Act. That kicks in January. That's only half a year. And that can be put, half of 1% can be on the employee and half of 1% on the employer. It's 1% total. So I don't know how the town is planning to structure that. But for somebody that makes $100,000, that's a cost in the upcoming budget of only $250. It can be $125 for the employee and $125 for the employer. I see a decrease, for instance, in commercial clam licenses. Well, is that because the town hall is now on a 4-day work week? And most people, when they are planning their weekend, they might see, oh, it's gonna be a beautiful weekend. I might wanna go clamming. And they come to get their clam license and, oh, you had to do that yesterday. People don't, like, there are consequences. So, I can pick out little things, but dollars and cents, it doesn't amount to a lot.
Yeah.
What I look at. The big numbers and the priorities are, have to come from people whose job it is to find.
Mhm.
Well, I watched a good number of the departments' meetings from home. And some I missed, but I saw most of them over the Friday and Saturday. A couple of things have come quickly to mind, and I don't remember if it was budgeted one. $275,000 cost for greenery along Route 1. What is that? You're gonna plant some green stuff on Route 1? Please, drop Mr. Hall's looking for $200,000. This 275 ought to be dropped immediately. That, so, you know, that somewhere, I believe in Todd Sousa's, budget is new bleachers somewhere. And I forget that cost. That was.
24,000.
That ought to be cut. There were two departments that want new fancy lawnmowers. And I will credit, I did hear Mr. Hall talk about it, the rest of it. They would look at some way to maybe buy one and split the use of it, but that should be a given. We don't need to, and they were both supposedly to mow the hill, so that it's more safely or something. But my suggestion would be buy a hand lawnmower and hire a high school kid to walk up and down and mow the lawn. We don't need a fancy riding mower to do it, but I mean, that's just over and above what's already been found. There ought to be minimum another million over and above the 2 point whatever it is you're talking. And see, nowhere 275 in the greenery is a no-brainer in my mind. If that stays in, shame on you folks.
Were you gonna say something? No.
Can we,
Yeah, go ahead.
can I just respond
Yeah.
very quickly? Richard, the auditorium is on the, unless Todd has something outside of the high school.
He does. They're bleachers at the softball field.
Oh,
Yeah.
well then I'll take back I was just gonna say the auditorium at the high school also needs bleachers. That's also in the capital improvement cost. But again, that's when I was just saying that part of the capital improvement cost, reducing those aren't going to impact the tax ask this year. That's one of those expenditures. So the reason those are in there is because as they stand right now, they're well beyond their useful life. So it's something that's been put off in the past and they can't come out anymore. They don't roll out any longer.
Yeah.
So that is why they're in there. But again, because of the timing, Kate explained it really beautifully in the finance committee meeting today. So when you have a moment, I definitely would encourage you to watch the recording. But the way that the ask works because of our timing of our budget, Todd can't start lining up contractors until after the budget passes and he knows that money, that funding has been approved. So that's June, right? But he's really looking at doing this work in the summertime when school's not in session. So after June, when he hears yes or no that this funding has been, this capital improvement project has been approved, he's actually looking to line up for the following year. So anything approved in June of this year wouldn't actually be done until June of 25. And nothing gets bonded until it's spent. So any capital improvement projects from the school will not impact you this year.
Well, there are two other ways though in the capital budget. One is there are items that are appropriated. And those are things like there are trucks on their regular replacement schedule. Those aren't going to be big numbers, but you know, they kind of add up. We have, I want to say 1.3 million between the town and the school and appropriated items. Then there's also the items that are TIF. I think the one that you were suggesting is TIF funded. And basically we could deprioritize that, but we would want to find other qualified uses for those TIF funds that could potentially be operating or the appropriation. So that is an exercise that we are working through and the committee is to really make sure we're using those TIF funds for the most important things. And if that means having to defer something because while it might be a good idea, this might not be the year for it, and there's some other way we would want to use those TIF funds. That's a item in motion that I think we're still working through to make sure that we have the right.
Made a presentation of switching around TIF money, taking where the money was coming from, what it's being used for, but on the bleachers, and Mr. Hall just confirmed it, that Todd is talking about bleachers somewhere else other than what's in the school.
There's two bleachers, I think. There's one or maybe I'm confusing.
These are ones close to the tennis courts, but they actually face the softball field. And I encourage you on your way home tonight, take a look at ones that are there. I think you'll agree that they need to be replaced.
Mhm. We have some other people who joined, so I don't know if you want to introduce yourself and if you have any questions.
Yeah, so Lisa Gradell, I am part of the school building advisory committee, so a few of us are here. And so school budget definitely comes to mind, but I actually had a process question about the $1 million for the police security cameras over 5 years that are going to a vote. Is that something that's already on the ballot and just we're gonna vote on it, or is that still something that we can?
So we would still have to approve it through the budget process, that we would be authorizing it, and then in August, the council takes action on any item that would go before voters. And so there's even been instances in the past where there's been items that have been put on, like we had Hurd Park, a huge renovation in Hurd Park a few years ago that was originally approved in the budget to move forward in our capital plan, but we ended up not going to voters because we decided to defer that until we had a Parks and Facilities master plan done. So really the decision point is August, right, Tom? Like that's when the council.
At the latest, yeah. And that decision by council is simply whether it goes on the ballot or not.
Yeah.
It's not that it approves it. It is the final check, if you will, as to if and when a matter goes to the voters for consideration.
So there's still time to, I guess, how do you decide whether it goes on the ballot?
Well, it's defined by value, by cost, and so it is required if the council deems it so, but the charter requires it to be.
Do you have a concern about it, or?
I don't know if there's been more workshops done on this, but the latest research on body cameras is pretty disappointing. It doesn't really help with security or crime or safety. And so it's money that just goes to vendors and for expensive equipment. So, you know, I would much rather have resources go to schools. Or those wages. Or wages, yes.
I would be interested if you could share with us the research that you have, just so that.
Hey, can I email it?
Yeah. Yeah, just so that we have that information as we go forward. And I'm assuming too, that because this is a potential ballot, there would be more work with the police department to bring.
Yes, I would fully expect them to do an educational campaign, yes.
Mhm. Any other comments or thoughts?
I guess back to the school stuff, I know at the last school building advisory committee, April mentioned briefly that the council is still figuring out how to account for a potential amount for school building project. She said it's so helpful to me, but I don't know what that process looks like, but I'd be curious on how you're thinking about that.
So my guess is once phase 1 is done for the current school building advisory committee, there will be a phase 2. Part of what's in the budget is money for the school to work through phase 2 to really, I think, whatever the recommendation is from the committee to further explore, study, and figure out what that number is. I think right now, as I think Richard, you said at the beginning, like, or somebody mentioned at the beginning, maybe it was you, was it Carrie? Carrie, how it could be a forced school, it could be, you know, something else. So I don't know when we're gonna know a number, but I would suspect that's phase 2 of the committee, once there's a recommendation, that the school would work with a new committee or the same committee, however we decide to move that forward, to kind of work through all those cost estimates.
Yeah, that's essentially the process. So as you know, you're doing work right now to really look through the work that's already been done. As a committee, come forward with a recommendation, which is supposed to come June 12th to the two bodies. We'll both, we're going to have a joint workshop with the leadership team and of the building committee to hear the recommendation and the rationale behind the recommendation, and then both bodies would vote on accepting that recommendation or not. From there, phase 2 work would be exactly as John described, where that's where we bring the consultant back in. We start getting to work on whatever solution it was, that recommendation it was that passed both bodies. And from there, we'll have an actual number.
When you say we'll bring the consultant back in, does that mean it's gonna be Harriman?
No, we'll bring a consultant back in. So right now, you're not using a consultant.
Right.
Right now, you're doing your work on your own. So we would bring a consultant back into the process. Let me word it that way. Phase 2.
But, and so all that happens though, after the budget has been approved by the town council. And actually after the voters have voted on the school budget.
Yes.
So, I mean, every project that we've had in the past, and even Todd Souza right now has an amount as a placeholder. We always put a placeholder in there in the 5-year capital plan, but we do not even have a placeholder, which, 2 years ago, we didn't either, even though we knew there was a school coming and there was, no amount in there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if you were to ask most people, we're looking at the whole range of options. It's gotta be upwards of $80 million. I would like to see a number in there so that we can at least, it's on everybody's radar that something is coming.
So whatever number we do decide to put in, you don't hold us to it.
Yeah.
Because it's a complete guess,
Absolutely.
because the process is not done.
I
But
think-
yes, we will certainly get a number in there, and we have, as I believe,
I think you missed it. This
John.
came up, Sue, before you came in.
yeah, John mentioned earlier, there is $500,000
Right.
in there as a placeholder to do
Mhm.
the engineering and the consulting work to hopefully get us to referendum.
It would be good to, like, as the building advisory committee. I mean, some of that analysis was done in terms of range in the past. So again, just if there is a number that's put in there, like Sue said, it can be a highly educated guess based on the last data of, it could range from 80 to 150 or whatever it is we would want to say. But again, what
That's
goes
what I
in.
was just telling, I actually just said that to Carolyn just a minute ago. We have there's a line item in it now that has 0. This literally, we just got this at
Okay.
the finance meeting. But we could even throw 100 million in there, which is
Somewhere in the middle.
somewhere in the middle of where we were before and 80 million. Yeah.
It's a big number, whatever it is. So
Yeah.
having something in there, I agree with you, is better than nothing. I think we just need to asterisk it to say,
This
This
is
is-
not a
this is an estimate
yeah.
based on something that we source, so that way we're just clear that it's not an official number. Like Todd's 50 million, I'm assuming, is based on, I think they're probably further along.
Yeah,
where
I
they
think
have
it's
a
fairly
real-
well informed.
Yeah,
It's worth noting, it'll bring some people comfort and others distress perhaps, but it's abundantly clear to me anyway that there's certainly no way that the school question will be before the voters this November. It's just not physically possible for the work to be done to make really a credible ask of the voters. So I know that might be disappointing to some, but I just don't see how we can do that in the time that we have between now and then.
A couple of things. First of all, I don't have the facts that Sue has. I'm impressed. Thank you. On the pool subject, I will be at the next community center committee meeting because I love pools. We're a swim family. My son's a swimmer in college, so we've been going to pools I've spent more time, so my clothes bleach themselves. I've so much chlorine in my blood now. But a pool is an incredibly expensive proposition. And it's not the building the pool, it's the maintaining and operating the pool. Club swimming in Maine is dying. There used to be 25 club teams in Maine and they're going away. It's going to be hard. So I just want to make sure they're being very conservative in their considerations on how to keep that pool up and running. Secondly, when we hire these consultants, it almost seems as if we tell them, show us what you got, okay? Instead of saying, look, we need a school, we can't spend more than this, do it. And I don't know how many consultants we go out to, if we always use Harriman, it seems like we do. What's the process for finding a consultant for this? Do we put it out to bid?
Oh, for sure. And this is a consultant out of Colorado, as I believe. They've got some
For the community.
for the community center, I should say. And they were selected very much because of their experience with costing out operational costs and a good sense of what revenue potential is. You know, whether you build eight, you know more about this than I do, 6 lanes or 8 lanes or 10-lane pool, what does that mean from a revenue potential and also operating expense, more water, more chlorine, you name it. So they're very thoughtfully selected, I think, and they're a terrific bunch. So yes, every time we go through a formal process.
Well, and then Tom, I'm sorry, I was talking more about the school when I asked that question, but I guess the one thing I would like to say, if you took that approach, okay, and call me negative, I'm sorry, if you came to the town once with what the citizens could look at and say, you know what, that's reasonable. You might earn a lot of trust, but everything is, we just, again, we seem to go overboard on everything. We can't.
But in the context of the school, I think you need to go through a thoughtful evaluative process to understand what the need is.
We all want good schools, we all want good services, but we don't need extravagance.
Yeah.
And some of the things we do are just overboard.
Fair point. So it's hard, and I think irresponsible to lead with a budget number. I think you need to go through the process, understand what the need is, and then work through and then find a way to value engineer and have it work toward a budget. But
Yeah.
the first step is to really be a thoughtful analysis of talking to the stakeholders, whether it's the educators and others in the context of the school to understand what is the need.
Yeah.
And then we better understand what the cost is.
I would say too that the one thing that impressed me with the last project that I'm assuming the new committee is looking at is they did a whole detailed workbook of all the programming needs and like broke that down by classroom. So they really built up to what they felt like they needed from a space perspective. It was their space allocation workbook is what it's called. So you might want to look into that. And I think they really tried to make sure what was in the building footprint was really just to meet those needs to support the programming, which was something that I didn't like appreciate until I was on that committee, just the details that go into that. But it was a real collaborative effort with the committee, with staff to make sure that the building could do it. But it just added up to be pretty expensive when you start to bring all of those schools into one location and also plan for the additional enrollment that's coming. So I think I felt like when the school came forward, it really was the best effort at getting an estimate. Now, it failed for many other reasons beyond just the cost, like somebody mentioned about people. I think we underestimated how much people love their neighborhood schools, in addition to the Downs element. So I think there was just a lot of things in that solution that, whether it was the cost or something, there was enough reasons for people to vote no. And so hopefully this new committee will kind of learn from that and figure out how we put something together that hopefully will pass. So good luck to you and to your wife, because it's a definitely a tall order. Yeah.
Spending down hopes of. That's what I.
What do you mean in terms of spending?
Roads, but going to, maybe I misunderstood that there was enough people ahead with roads that were necessary for the city to have certain areas of the downs and stuff, and those were gonna be done in hopes of having these alternatives. Maybe I misunderstood.
So that was actually, are you talking about when the previous school solution was put out there, or are you talking about something different now? I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding your question. I was thinking you were saying when the school was originally going to be in the Downs, there was some conversation about the road network and infrastructure.
Right.
But as of today, like the town doesn't do any of their infrastructure. That's all paid for by the developer. So I'm not sure I understand your question, Rita. Okay. Well, hopefully I did. And if I didn't, I'm happy to follow up with you.
Clarify, it is not totally paid by itself. Okay.
We pay this, yeah, that's fair. We pay, that's why we have a CEA. The CEA is intended for them to put in the upfront infrastructure. And then the CEA we give them is really kind of the annuity payment that we pay them over time. for them taking on the risk of putting in all of that public infrastructure. And I think to date, they've put in like $68 million worth of infrastructure, and we've paid maybe $5 million in CEA payments.
It's been estimated that we will contribute somewhere close to $1 million.
We recently had Karen, because now we have actuals to look at real data. So we didn't get to cover it in our finance committee meeting. It was something before budget kicked off that we just couldn't get to. But she did take some new modeling and relook at the forecast. And I want to say it's coming in pretty close to what the town had originally estimated, which is around 80 million. We haven't looked at that yet. I think that's a future agenda item for us to kind of dig back into and really understand. 80 million in CEA payments. So essentially over the 30 years that we have the agreement with them, the original estimate when the town originally signed it was around 80 million. And that was again based on assumptions, projections. Now that we have 5-6 years of real data, Karen Martin, who's the head of SEDCO, went back, applied those real numbers to kind of better extrapolate what we think the payments are going to be, including other things that have come up. And I think what she shared was that it was pretty close still in terms of what their original assumptions were, even with the new data. But again, that's like, it all depends. They only get paid if they meet the requirements of our agreement. So that's the piece that we have to hold against them, is like, if they don't deliver on their performance criteria, then they don't get paid. And if people don't pay their property taxes in the downs, then that also impacts what they get paid, because it's based on what we collect from the district. Any other questions or comments? So what I heard was better prioritize our capital for sure. And as we work through capital, be pragmatic about it. Again, I would encourage anybody who's concerned about the capital projects, like it sounds like you have family involved, so at least you guys are partially involved, but join some of these committees, because we need people on there advocating for what's important to them. Again, a lot of the times, the people who join them really care about the topic, right? Like, I want a community center, so I'm gonna go in the committee. I don't know the makeup of that committee well enough to know, do we have somebody on there, Carrie, with your mindset, who we want that on the committee, because it has to represent all of Scarborough, and you know, we're leaning on these committees to do it. I love the new school building committee, because I think it is probably the most diverse committee of opinions that we've ever had on a single committee. Some of it's a large committee, as you know, and so that creates some structural challenges, but you know, I'm really excited to see what we get out of it because of the diversity in viewpoints. I'm hoping it will be something that everybody will feel like they see a little bit of something for them in there, even if it's not exactly what they wanted, but that's the objective, is to find that right solution. Well, we have a finance committee on that. I think, you know, that would be, I've always thought, would it be interesting to have a citizen committee to help with, like, give financial perspective? Because we have a lot of political action committees in town that care about it. And while that's good and helpful, I feel like having people work with the town, work with the council in a more direct manner, that have the right skills and financial management for public stuff. Like, none of us are public finance people. That's not, you know, that's not our background. So we lean on staff and residents a lot of times for a lot of our committees to have the expertise to help guide decision-making, just like in any business, right? Like, you have your governing board or something. They're not necessarily experts in everything, but we need the experts at the table to help us.
Well, I think the question the gentleman asked earlier is, how much taxes are we expected ultimately as taxpayers to pop up? And you know, when you're getting $1,000 a month for living in a house, for taxes, depending on, you know, how nice your house is and stuff, that's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of money for retired people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I would like to echo that and to remind all of those here tonight Me personally, I'm a guy on a fixed income. I retired, not luxuriously. I've said this before, I bought a home that I could afford when I had an executive salary. Now, on that salary, I couldn't afford it because of the increase in valuation. I live in a home that looks not too much different than the one I grew up in, except had a few extra bedrooms. But my point is that when I run this through my own lens, I'm going to guesstimate that my taxes this year, because of the revaluation, will probably go up $1,000, and they'll go up another 250 or so because of the town. And when I look at my fixed income, that means that I'm paying a higher percentage, just like you. There are a couple of issues here. One is bigger than us, and that is that we persist in financing public education with property taxes. And that puts an unfair burden on people at their end game. And until we grapple with that problem, it's not enough to say, well, yeah, we all want good schools. I want good schools. My kids graduated from these schools, and happily they've benefited from the education. But there is a point where that look back value starts to have some diminishing returns, where you feel like you've paid your dues. And that I see the community center like you. I'm a swimmer guy, or used to be, because my shoulders are kind of shot now. But no, I was just a freestyler with a hull speed. but I think that, I've lived here, except for a 12-year hiatus, my entire professional life, about 35 years, and I trucked myself and my kids into that little pool at the YMCA for year after year after year. I would love a community center. And the reason I would love a community center is it would directly benefit me. Okay. It would be something that I could feel and connect with and so forth. And I sit here and say, and now we're talking about taking something that would be a benefit to me, and I'm not just me, a lot of other people in town, and saying, well, let's put that aside because our education system is important. I agree that it is. But until we address the big problem, if we follow the plan here, what you're going to, instead of having some nice two things in a town which we would like to appreciate going forward, we're going to see those things erode. And I can tell you, if I were voting purely my personal interest, I could sit here and say, no, no, no. But what I will say is that you're the first time I've seen you here tonight, first time I've seen 3 new people in these budget meetings. And that's not to disparage in any way the people who come and put in the time and read the budget and so forth. But if we get as many people who show up here to concern about these things as we do for the Plovers or the Scarborough connector, I've received to date no direct emails to me, and I think to the group I've seen 3 on this budget. And so in some sense, Scarboroughans, if you're out there watching this, okay, this is a democracy. And the time to step up and get in here and say this is, if you want to be represented, right, then you need to speak up. I'll make one final point, since I was quiet the whole meeting and we're in, as Bill Maher says, overtime. That I ran for this office on a platform of improving communication. And we are working through, in the communication committee, a lot of, I think, serious process issues with the structure of our communication. Those take time. But in the meantime, I've been campaigning. I've had articles in the Leader. I've published my phone. In fact, we now have business cards that I'm more than happy to hand you. But the fact is that those efforts have yielded next to a flat line in terms of people who have really reached out. And so the point of the not listening representatives is to say, well, wait a minute. Should I, as a government official, listen only to the voices of the loud folks who come here with a very direct point of view? Or if I'm truly trying to represent people, should I do my best to find out the other side of the story, even though candidly, people are kind of lazy about it until they get their tax bill? Okay, so this is a two-way street. And so when I come here and say, how many of these meetings do we have?
We have one more. We have one tomorrow at Hillcrest and then one more.
Yeah, so we'll have four. And one of the things we'll do in communication, if I have my way, is we'll take mandatory attendance and publish the counts. Okay, so if we manage to get 20 people at all of these budget meetings, I'll be surprised. Okay.
I would just say, like, in the past, the 3 years prior that I've been on the council, we posted these. You know, there was one year where we had 2 meetings. We had 4 again, 2 where nobody showed up and we just stopped it at half an hour. So it's not that we're not trying, but it's just, you know, everybody's busy and everybody has stuff to do and, you know. But I think.
John, I
to that
think that's fair. People are busy, okay? And when I was busy and I was just, you know, my tax bill was buried in my mortgage payment, and so I didn't have to actually get it and come down here and write a check, okay? Then I just went on with my busy life and I paid my taxes and I didn't complain about it. Okay? But if you're at a point where you're holding that tax bill in your hand and you're saying, this is hurting me, come and explain how it's hurting you, all right? It is our responsibility to put financial constraints on the town. And I believe that we've started to do that by asking to get the thing down without any use of fund balance, to get the thing down by
4.2 million.
well, 2 point, yeah, is that what it is? 2.2. And I heard Richard say, how about another million? Maybe. I'd like to see where we end up with that. And I'm also a fan of Sue's approach. I described it the other day, is I'm an English teacher. I'm going to show you what a sonnet looks like. Now go write one. Okay? And so I think that what we need to do, you know, I don't want to talk about body cameras. I want to talk about a number that's affordable for the taxpayers. And I want the guy who's running the show to go figure out how to make that happen. I was him for my entire career. I got those kind of instructions, and believe me, if somebody told me I need this much, I'd find it. So, end of speech. Sorry.
Thank you.
No. And I will say, we gave him, that is what we did. We gave him the 5% net budget target, said we need you to come in. And then he and the school didn't come in at the number, and that's where we're at in the process. Is the number hasn't changed. We still need you to come in at the number. What's new is we did get the reval stuff, which I think, you know, is challenging for this year for sure, where that's creating additional challenges, because if we didn't have it, we'd be talking about a 2.25% increase, which is pretty consistent with what the town has historically done year over year. It's actually on the lower side. And so that was initially from a budgetary perspective where we said, you know, 2.25 sounds like a reasonable target for us to have this year. But again, we set that before we knew the reval impacts.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
That's all well and good, but there's still nothing wrong with coming in below that. If you can find stuff, and I'm coming back to the greenery, you know, I just can't get that out of my head.
Mm-hmm.
We would spend $275,000 making more green stuff on Route 1. I mean, so if that lowers, you know, your 2.5 number to 2.3 or 2.2, that's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know? If you do better than what you were shooting for, nobody in town is going to be upset at you.
Yeah, and I don't think we would be upset either. And I think that's partially our responsibility as a finance committee, is to say, you know, that was our goal, but now we know what he proposed. do we feel like from a policy goal perspective, are all those investments the right things? The thing about the greening thing that you're referring to, it's not really, the objective is not just to green Route 1. There was a lot of conversation about it in the session where it's really about stormwater management. And in order to do that, putting the greenery in there does help, and it makes it look good. But the objective is to help manage runoff, stormwater, which is really a goal of the council to help be more environmentally conscious.
John, let me respond to that, because I think that is really interesting, you know. I've looked at it and said, gee, the library wants a librarian, the school wants a librarian, they're about, 500 feet from each other, why can't we share a library? I don't know if that's a good idea or not, so we are making those kinds of suggestions. And one of the things that I found when I make a suggestion, like, why do we need trees, for example, and you hear a response that said, well, it's not really a tree, it's stormwater management. Okay, and we go back and forth, and that's where I come back to say, fine, find me $1 million, find me $2 million, and we pay town management to provide us to execute our policy. And if our budgetary policy is, this is what we need the spend to be, then the management needs to go and get that spend in that ballpark. So that is, so I think that's where, I read the whole thing, I listened to all the presentations, all the ideas seemed good. And I couldn't find well, why is this? There's $500,000 on the school side to fix the track, apparently. Why do we need to fix the track right away? Close it for a while. That's just my opinion. Okay. So it's not like we are not making suggestions, finding things that other people haven't thought of. But again, I think until you set a hard line, do not cross this line, then it's, I think is the other guy said to Rooster and True Grit, a lot of talk from a one-eyed fat man.
I think to your point, like that's the hard part, is that everything that was shared, there's a justification for it, right? Like,
Yeah.
And so then it comes down to subjective, do you think it's important or not? Again, I always look at what are our council goals and like, where do those things fit into those? And if they don't, then I would question it and say, I really don't think this should be in the budget this year if it's not supporting the goal. Again, this year's budget, what it mostly is wages and new school staff. Essentially, those are the big budget drivers, and those wages are really driven by collective bargaining agreements that we have to negotiate and have a good faith amount in our budgets to support what we anticipate could come out of it. And so, and the students for the schools, as Sue mentioned, or someone mentioned, 11 are state mandated. They're required that we hire 11 ed techs to support special needs for kids on IEPs. That's not like something we can say, well, we don't want to fund 11. So, but what we could say is we don't want to fund 11, or that's a lot. Go find $200,000 to make room for it. But we can't.
And I don't think very many people will get upset about hiring new school staff either. Teaching staff and ed techs are important people.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the things that has frustrated me about this process. And I'll share more qualifications. Like John, I have an MBA. I've managed organizations that have budgets as big as this town. And I have never been more confounded in looking at a financial document than this municipal approach to accounting. And our finance committee, I believe, has committed to recasting the reports so that somebody with an interest and reading, writing, arithmetic, education can do the math and see what's going on. So for example, most of the questions that I saw Steve Hanley ask, he asked really good questions. He would have been able to answer himself with a better presentation.
Mhm.
And I'll give you just one example. Here's this column that says, this is what we actually spent in 2023. This is what we think we're going to spend by the end of 24. This is what we need to spend to quote unquote level. And what level means is to meet our existing obligations. And then if you moved across people, then you say, here are increases that are related to previous obligations in union contracts. Here are discretionary increases in wages. Here are additions in people. Okay, here's the total people number. Here's the benefit. Here's the X, and so on and so forth. And then you can add FTEs to that. You can very quickly understand the entire people picture in this town, which is 80% of it in 6 columns. And so I think that that would go a long way, because then you can go down the list and Richard can say, trees, I don't like that. And he can see, he won't have to dig for 6 hours to see that the trees will stand out from the forest, if you will. And that is something that I think will increase trust. It will promote involvement, because it's the rare person when I see Sue and Steve and Richard and some of these folks who dig into this budget voluntarily. God love them. Okay, but we should be able to publish the front line, not just giant numbers in the front page of the leader, and have the average person be able to look and say, this is what they're doing.
Mhm.
So anyway, next year, I'm hung by the tongue is the expression. Next budget, we'll have that presentation.
We tried to do that this year. I would say it's a learning year, like we're doing something different.
Right.
So what we had both the staff, and the school do is, try and show, we took a step in the right direction to try and show almost what Don mentioned, but not exactly. And again, I think that's a learning opportunity for us to help better provide staff guidance in terms of what's going to help us make decisions, or what we think will be easy for the public to digest. Because I agree with Don, like this book is what we get, and you can see my little stickies in there because you get a lot of questions, and I probably more like Don, and Carolyn's the CFO, so like we're used to seeing financials in a different way, and this is a little bit more the details that typically support something that I would say we're more accustomed to seeing, that you can, and so it's in here, it's just not in here in a way that's easy for somebody to like, or even me, like when I get it, I have to hunt and peck to find what I'm looking for. I get there because I'm used to it at this point, but to Don's point, I'm so glad he's on the
I
committee.
don't want to get used to it.
He doesn't want to get used to it. And I don't want to do it anymore either. So that's where we agree on that. I know Carolyn's looking to do it, but again, I think, this is, not making excuses, but where this is today, I have to give a lot of credit to the former assistant town manager who left, I want to say like 4 years ago. This is believe it or not, this is an improvement to what existed before that. So I think we're all committed to keeping on improving it to make it better. Yep.
Well, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for
Thank you,
coming
guys.
and for sharing your feedback. We appreciate it, and definitely try and go to that community center meeting.
What's the date on that again?
It's this week. I think it goes from 3 to 7 on the 24th on Wednesday.
Thank you.
What cafeteria?
Wentworth Cafeteria.
Thank you.
Thank